welcome to our Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, the world's first zero waste adventure, how we did it, and how you can too. Our guest speakers today, Erin Simon from the WWF and Dr. Court Whelan. And I want to tell you a little bit about Court, and then he will introduce Erin. So Court was born and raised in Florida, spent much of his youth outdoors, fostering a strong love and appreciation for nature and wildlife. And this fascination led him to attend the University of Florida, where he received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees in both ecotourism and entomology. He's been a regular on our Daily Dose of Nature. Most of you probably remember him from our photography series. And it's going to be exciting to hear from him today about this zero waste adventure. No doubt many of these photos are his as well. So Court, over to you, and I'll let you introduce Erin.
Thanks so much, Lee. Yeah, pleasure to be here today. Thank you to all of you for joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, my friend, my partner in this webinar, Erin Simon, who is just an awesome person. But her official title is Director of Plastics and Business, or Head of Plastics and Business at World Wildlife Fund. But really, the way I know her is she's just a guru about everything waste, everything sustainability. She is an amazing resource. It's truly a privilege to have her here with us today. So without further ado, Erin, I'll let you maybe say a few words and then I'll jump right into the presentation.
Thanks, Court, and thanks so much for having me on today. So as Court said, I lead up plastic waste and business at World Wildlife Fund. My background is in packaging engineering and material science, and so for the past 9 years, I've been working at the world's largest conservation organization to figure out how to help people and nature engage better around these things. And my focus and my key constituents are often businesses, but this trip allowed us to really test out some new things and think about how we can inspire the entire tourism industry. So looking forward to the questions you guys have, and hopefully this is a fascinating webinar for you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Erin. We'll just jump right into it. So yeah, the world's first zero waste adventure. We're going to talk a lot about that, explain like how we came to it, what it actually means, and how you can actually get some takeaways for integrating zero waste or minimal waste in your own lives. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So first of all, you got to think, okay, aren't you guys a travel company? Why are you talking about the waste stream? Where does conservation fit in with all this? And simply put, the why behind me, the why behind Natural Habitat is we're trying to save the world through travel. You know, in a lot of ways, we are a conservation organization doing conservation via travel. In fact, our motto, our mission statement begins with conservation through exploration. So in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is add value to natural ecosystems, and sustainability and conservation is a hugely integral part of that, as you can imagine. But how does that lead us to wanting to stuff every bit of trash that we produce over the course of a 7-day trip into one tiny mason jar? Like, how did this idea get born? Well, there's kind of two ways to look at this. One is, you know, the punctuated light bulb moment, that aha, like, oh my gosh, this is the idea. This is what we have to do. And that, of course, happened right here in our own little kitchen and lounge area at Natural Habitat headquarters in Boulder, Colorado. And it was just a Friday afternoon. We were sitting around talking, and one of my colleagues came up to me and said, Court, I've got this crazy idea. You know, this might be the next big industry first. We as a company are constantly looking for what we call industry first, these big leading of the vanguard type of mentalities that can push us into new directions and new heights with sustainability. And so Lauren came to me and said, hey, what about a zero waste adventure? This is actually right now today, over 2 years ago when this initial idea came up, because this adventure took place last July. And at that point, we've been working on this for about 18 months, believe it or not. So that was the light bulb moment from Lauren Daly, and she had this idea. And of course, at first, I'm like, that's crazy. Are you serious? But as we started talking about it in follow-up green team meetings, having more conversations with team leaders at Natural Habitat, the entire green team, et cetera, we started to realize, holy cow, it's going to take a lot of work, but this actually is doable. And this is at a point where the term zero waste was barely even talked about, certainly not a household word at that point. I like to think today, now it is a little bit more of a concept, but nevertheless, that was the light bulb moment. But really equally, if not more importantly, is again, our commitment to sustainability, what a lot of our partners, a lot of our guests, a lot of even the hotels we work with around the world call the Nat Hab effect. And I think this is really cool. And we'll just kind of go through some of these slides real quickly, just to show, you know, you have that light bulb moment, but really conservation is in our DNA. So one of our big industry firsts was now about, 13 years ago, we became the world's first carbon neutral travel company. We offset all of our carbon emissions through various restorative processes like reforestation, building solar farms and wind farms, investing in alternative energy around the world. So we have been carbon neutral. So that's a big part of why we wanted to do another industry first. We have partnered with World Wildlife Fund for many years now, since 2003, and gaining more and more closeness throughout the years. And not only do we get this wonderful partnership, we get people like Erin to work with us on trips, work with us after trips to help level up and increase our level on sustainability across the board. We have little programs, smaller programs that is, called Nat Hab Philanthropy, and most recently our Community Relief Fund, where we invest in small projects where a little bit of money goes a long way around the world, like investing in wolf collaring or saving lemurs in Madagascar. We have, of course, our green team. We're out here on one of our couple of days each year volunteering on local trails in Boulder County, rebuilding trails for hikers and bikers. And it even goes to the point where we have a basket in our office where someone collects mascara tubes, old mascara tubes, packages them up and ships them to an animal orphanage in Arkansas so they can be cleaned and reused to groom small baby orphan animals. That's just the kind of people we are in the office. It goes to those depths. No project too small nor too big, as you'll get into in here in the next little bit when we talk about this zero waste trip. The concept and planning, we had this idea, okay, great, it's big, it's audacious, it's an industry first, but how in the world did we go from that light bulb moment to actually orchestrating, and spoiler alert, it was successful, the world's first successful zero waste adventure in Yellowstone National Park? Well, I spoiled that. As far as where we did it, we had to choose, okay, there are, we operate in 45 different countries, 90 different itineraries around the world. What is going to be the trip where we actually do zero waste? Well, I won't go into this a whole lot, but we started to think, okay, worst case scenario, if we can't find the right composting facilities, recycling facilities, if it's hard to ship products, to Botswana or to far off places in Alaska or China or wherever in the world, Yellowstone is kind of metaphorically in our own backyard. Here in Colorado, we're not too far away. Having that close approximation means that we can probably get stuff there, sustainability goods, and track things a little bit easier. In addition, not coincidentally, I like the fact that it's in some ways the world's first national park in the late 1800s. So there's a lot of symbolism there as well. And of course, it is the US's most visited national park. And then it comes down to the fact that, when we talk about the waste stream and sustainability, keeping it local is so darn important. So having one of the trips that we do, one of our biggest programs or bigger programs, be, again, so close to where we're based out of, a place that we know and love so well, was just another feather in the cap. So before I turn it over to Erin in a couple slides, where she's going to talk a little bit more about kind of like the materials behind all this, we had to define, okay, zero waste. It's a big term, it's audacious. We have to boil it down to something here to actually get a definable term, to understand what our mission is. What are we going to be doing? What are we not going to be doing? Well, we settled on this definition of at least 99% of all waste produced by Nat Hab guests as a byproduct of Nat Hab trip operations is either recycled, composted, upcycled, reused, i.e., in summary, 99% of waste is diverted from landfill. That 1% of waste, as you'll see, I kind of had this creative, kind of cheesy idea, but it actually pulled off pretty well, is we should be able to fit everything we produce as far as waste, this 1%, in one little mason jar, and that's the symbol of the trip. Stay tuned to see if we did it that way. Nevertheless, we had to define what things are we not going to be including. Well, I'll keep this slide short and sweet. Anything that goes into a bathroom trash can or toilet, hygienic reasons, that's obviously something we're not going to include. That's kind of one of the things first people ask is like, wait, zero waste. So cat out of the bag, this is not included. But that leaves still a lot of things throughout the adventure that we have to consider. And this is where we get folks, experienced folks like World Wildlife Fund, especially Erin, involved, not just before the trip, but during the trip itself. So hand it over to you, Erin.
Yeah, so some of the first questions that Nat Hab about how to make this possible were around materials. Like, how do we choose? Do we have to stop using certain materials? And so we really wanted to talk a little bit about the materials that we engage with every day, especially while you're traveling, and how WWF thinks about them, right? And so the first thing we always think about when we talk about any material is that we have to ask them all the same questions, right? Where does it come from? what do you need to use it for, and then what happens to it when you're done with it? How do we get it back, right? For a conservation organization, we want to make sure that anything we take from the planet is sustainably sourced, meaning that generations to come can still get it. And then we want to make sure when we're done with it, it's not ending up back in nature in the form of litter or marine debris. And so we want to make sure that we have appropriate waste management systems for that, either recycling or compost, for example. And so you can go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to take you through some of this with all the different materials, because I think there's a lot of preconceived notions about materials, and plastic is definitely one of those, right? It's the material we love to hate, but it has a lot of environmental, surprise, surprise, value, but also some impacts. So we really have to address that when we're thinking about how we use it and manage it when we're done. So where does plastic come from? Plastic comes from traditionally petroleum and natural gas, right? It's usually coming from a non-renewable resource. Sometimes we can get it from sustainably sourced biomass like corn or sugarcane, but most of it today comes from non-renewable resources, excuse me. Plastic, however, is lightweight, high performance, highly durable, and really inexpensive material. That's why you see it everywhere. It's in our clothing, in our food, in our medical devices, in our construction, and in our cars and airplanes to lightweight them. So it's really a valuable material in those ways. But how do you get it back, right? It has to be recycled in a place where that material is accepted. And there is a lot of variation in the types of plastics out there, which can make that recycling challenging. It can be compostable or biodegradable if there are industrial facilities that can manage it. And it also is a material we can use for reuse. Go ahead to the next slide. Another material that a lot of people ask questions about is aluminum, right? Why don't we just move to aluminum? And aluminum is a great material because it's really recyclable and easily recyclable, but not many people think about where it comes from. The base of aluminum is a material called bauxite, which we have to mine from the surface of the earth. And in order to mine, there's a lot of environmental impacts around that, right? Through water use, totally moving an entire ecosystem out of the way, solid waste, liquid waste, toxins, air pollution. So there's a lot of implications from raw material sourcing for aluminum. It is really light and really strong. It has a lot of great barrier properties. And when I talk about barrier, I mean like oxygen and water, right? When you hold it in the can, it doesn't come out, or it can hold in the carbonation. And it's infinitely recyclable. Aluminum has 95% less energy to recycle it than it does to produce a virgin one in the first place, which is great. So it's really highly recyclable. All right, go ahead to the next slide, Court. Another material that we're always talking about is paper, right? And thinking about why can't we make things more out of trees, right? Because those feel very natural to us. And so there's an opportunity for that, to use that. But the challenge with pulp and paper is it doesn't have quite the properties that plastic or aluminum or glass do, right? It can be heavier. It requires a lot of water produce, but it doesn't have the ability to hold in water or oxygen or a barrier to as many things without a coating, without a plastic coating often. But it can be super renewable if you source those trees sustainably. And of course, pulp and paper and like paper products are easily recycled, just if they are done sustainably and we get them into the recycling system. So go ahead to the next one, Court. And then finally, a lot of people ask the question, why can't we make everything compostable or biodegradable? Why can't we just let it go back to nature and disappear? But the reality is that's not really what happens. Biodegradability actually requires a whole set of temperature and humidity and bacteria and UV light. All of those elements need to exist in order for something to break down. And so everything we put into nature is not going to just break down, and while it exists, while it persists, it can cause a lot of damage. And so what we like to do is make sure that anything that is compostable or biodegradable is ending up in an industrial compost facility, because that way we know we can get it back, right? That way we know that we're going to get value from that material when it breaks down and use it in the form of like soil nutrients or humus or water. So while biodegradability is not going to solve the waste crisis, it can be a part of the solution. Go ahead to the next slide.
Cool. Okay, so I think this is back to me now. So of course one of the big steps is we had to get educated. We had to understand things. We of course, we understood recycling and composting. We do a lot of that in all of our trips whenever and wherever we can. But this was me next level. And as you'll see in a bit, we're holding ourselves essentially to perfection, which is a big challenge in its own right. So we had to start off by thinking, okay, great, we've got to market this. We've got to design proposals for our own company. We've got to design proposals for World Wildlife Fund to get further involved and have reps on scouting trips and on the trip itself. So there's a lot of stuff. We had to design a letter for basically every single restaurant, every single hotel, explaining what we're doing and what we're asking for their participation. Because the thing is that we're not a closed system as a tour company. We work, as you'll see again later in a few slides, like 4 different hotels, 9 different restaurants, 4 different cities, a national park, state parks. And these are all different entities that we're kind of bringing into this puzzle. So we had to do that proactive communication across the board. And as you can imagine, it's quite a bit of work. But again, one of the biggest things was integrating and injecting that mindset into our travelers, basically. So, as a travel company, we put the call out to all of our guests out there to say, hey, listen, we're doing this trip. It's a world's first. It's an industry first. You can be a pioneer with us. But again, that's just that's just the tip of the iceberg. Once someone had actually called in and inquired, we had some vetting questions, believe it or not, because we wanted to make sure, hey, if you're joining this trip, this is not going to be like exactly every other trip. We want to keep a lot of the core elements, the great scenery, the wildlife, the camaraderie, the wonderful eco lodges, et cetera, et cetera. But you might be scraping your plate into a compost bin at the end of your lunch. You might be having to separate plastics from glass if we're using those and finding those along our way. So you have to be more participatory than the average trip. Fortunately, we didn't have to kick anybody off the trip. We didn't have to preclude or prevent anybody from joining. But nevertheless, it was another step in the process, is getting the right people on the trip that acknowledged that they were getting into this next level type of conservation adventure. Another step in the process was scouting. As you can tell from this beautiful scene, this is the real hard part. Scouting is just a big, tough part of our jobs. We got to be in these awesome vehicles, driving this beautiful scenery, but someone's got to do it. So yeah, we scouted it out. We have to go to these different restaurants. We might have to change hotels here and there if one's not necessarily willing to work with us. Fortunately, a lot of these people, as you'll see in the results section, a lot of these organizations and partners were very enlivened and very encouraged by what we were doing and very, very ready to participate. But we didn't know that from the outset, so we had to be inspectors, we had to be detective, we do a lot of work on figuring out, okay, so in travel, what are all the things that we might have to throw away? As much as we like to think that everything made of plastic can be recycled, or paper or glass, there's very different things when it comes down to like crinkly plastics and all sorts of different materials. So we had to think, well, gosh, when's the last time you cracked into one of those single-use coffee makers in the hotel room? There's a lot of stuff that is truly single-use. There's a lot of that stuff that would probably have to go into that mason jar. And that mason jar is glass. It doesn't grow. It's a very fixed size. We have to stick to that 1%. So we're starting to think, wait, isn't the cafe at Ernie's, I think they use disposable plates. What about the breakfast buffet? Remember, this is like a 6-7 day trip. What about the special s'more setup we surprise our guests with? I mean, what's the packaging like for these marshmallows? The picnic lunches. What if someone orders wine at dinner? Are we going to start recycling every single bottle? What about snacks for hikes? In the past, we've used like Cliff Bars and granola bar wrappers. Those things are not easily recyclable. Even things like cream and sugar in the morning, for coffee. A lot of questions had to be asked and then answered along the way. So the big challenge is that, like I said, we have 4 hotels, 9 restaurants, 4 cities, 7 days, many different activities, many different wonderful hikes and activities, but we don't have a lot of direct control over a lot of it. So we had to start working with a lot of different people. There's a learning curve when it comes to this. We worked with a lot of different hotels here. And of course, these single-use containers were some of the first things that we thought of and the first things that needed to go. Things like single-serve coffee stations where you have a little bit of plastic and paper, and single-serve like Splenda containers and whatnot. We had to ask for all these things to be removed from the rooms. We had this sort of out of sight, out of mind context. Now, looking back, fortunately, this was actually one of the things I think maybe in our learnings that we didn't necessarily have to do, because we prepped our guests so well ahead of time to avoid these sort of things. I don't think we necessarily had to take it out of sight, out of mind. People would have known themselves, but nevertheless, this is the first time ever doing this. There was no precedent set. We had to be extremely thorough because we wanted perfection. But like I said, there was a learning curve involved. You know, when we contacted some of these hotels, they, you know, these are in a lot of cases very rural, and they don't, I mean, yes, they would do exactly what we say, but they don't, you know, realize when we say take anything single use out of the rooms, they would take everything. And so we would get into a room and there would be no TP on the TP holder. And we'd say, oh, okay, we're gonna have to go provision all 7 rooms now with toilet paper. So a lot of learning curve, but you know, one of the great things is that we did learn a lot, and we have a great roadmap. And one of the big takeaways from this trip, we're not to this section yet, but one of the big takeaways is a best practices document that we've now pinged out to the industry as how they can replicate as much of this as they possibly would like to. So really cool stuff there. So it's not just about taking away, but also replacing and provisioning the trip with certain things. You know, we have to think about, okay, so sometimes we use Ziploc bags to store, you know, baby carrots for the lunch. Sometimes we, you know, have to use single-use silverware because this cafe is in the middle of nowhere and that's all they have. They don't have a dishwasher there necessarily. So we had to think about reusable silverware. We had to think about our own recycling bins. We could take the soda cans or whatever out of the restaurants. We'd have to, you know, store them ourselves, and we have these couple of Sprinter vans. And in addition to the things you see on this container, we also brought a scale with us because we thought, well, gosh, if we're going to do this, let's measure what we're doing. Let's get some honest to goodness metrics so we can figure out what percentage of things and how much are we really using over the course of the trip. So I'm glad that the green team had that forethought, because it got some really cool numbers, which we'll see here in just a few more slides. So moving on to, I'm going to pass the microphone, so to speak, back to Erin. You know, when we think about these things like the reusables, like the little stasher bags, which we're now seeing in a lot of supermarkets, I love the traction this is gaining. You know, what are the things that we do need to think about out there?
Yeah, and I think reusables is a big part of this, right? And how do you make decisions about what materials to use and what designs? And so I want to highlight the fact that the key to reusable and sustainability and making something and using something that is better than a single use is the in its name, right? It's the reuse in the first place. So to highlight on this though, these are durable materials, right? They got to last through hundreds of uses, and so there's going to be a lot more material in them than there is in the single use. And so what we want to make sure is that we're thinking about what we're sourcing from and how we're sourcing to make that product in the first place. There's a lot of options out there, right, around what can be reusable: coffee cups, silverware napkins, water bottles, to-go containers, snack boxes, all of the bathroom stuff that we use while we travel. And so when we're thinking about what those can be made of, we want to make sure that they're highly durable, and that that plastic is okay for that, right? Because we know plastic can be quite durable. But if you really want to dig into it, the life cycle assessment of these materials is really going to be the only way we're going to figure out like whether or not this right here is better than a plastic bottle that's reused. And so at the end of the day, whichever you choose, stick with it, reuse it. Don't buy the next trendy water bottle, just keep using the one you got and carry it with you everywhere so that you always have the opportunity to reuse versus buying a new one. The final thing, and I would highlight this, is a really big point right now with the situation we're in with COVID-19, is that cleaning and food safety are a big challenge, right? You have to be able to clean something that you're reusing over and over again. And so when you're traveling, thinking about how to do that is a really important aspect, especially in areas of the world where it's harder to get access to clean water. So something to think about as you start to plan for it and how you think about the reuse you're going to do on your trip. Go ahead.
Excellent. So, you know, getting back to kind of like the trip planning and execution, I think one of the biggest challenges we had, one of the biggest stressors, is that we were aiming for perfection. Now, 99% of perfection is perfection. One of my biggest fears, frankly, is that we were going to go to one of these cafes and we were getting like takeout lunches, because we do a lot of picnic lunches. We'll go pick up sandwiches and we'll bring them to the trail and we'll hike with them. So there's some beautiful outlook. And we might have like some surprise, you know, beverages or drinks up there or something, but people will come there. I was worried that we get to this cafe to pick up our lunches and they didn't get the message that we want them to put them on our reusable Tupperwares or stasher bags. And there was gonna be a stack of 12 styrofoam boxes. That was my biggest fear personally. We just blew it, you know, because we can't just throw it under the rug. That would have to come with us. We'd have to, I mean, we'd try to put it in the mason jar, but it would blow the trip, you know. So that idea of perfection, I think, is one of the biggest challenges, and that's what took disproportionate amount of time, unfortunately. And sometimes I wait to say this adage towards the end of the talk, but I think it's worth mentioning here is that, you know, as we go through these materials, as we go through these strict guidelines that we're talking about, the point is that, we don't need 12 people doing zero waste perfectly every year. We need 1 million people doing it imperfectly every year. So take away whatever you can from this. You do one thing, that's one thing better than you were doing before. You do 10 things, 10 times the better, But the point is we had to do it this way to figure out where the loopholes, where the pitfalls really were. And so we really get into it. So we start off, we're thinking, well, one part of the trip experience is the pre-trip guest prep. We send out materials. Now, this is just an example. We weren't doing the Monarch trip here, but I had this slide, and we have all these different paper materials that we do send, because pre-trip prep is important. Some people don't like reading on computers or don't have PDFs. Some people don't use email at times. So we have to, use these by default. But for this case, we said, okay, it's got to be all electronic and all digital. And I think getting us, prodding us forward on making, better digital products and better digital sharing technologies for our information actually gave us a whole new horizon, a whole new possibility in all of our materials going forward. So it actually helped in part change in our own methodologies by saying, okay, from the get-go, we don't want to be contributing to any sort of waste, even if it's not on trip itself. Then the trip begins, expedition leadership in the days prior to the trip itself, myself and other expedition leaders, we arrived, we had new prep work. We had a lot more materials, things that we had to think about in terms of stasher bags versus Ziplocs. We had reusable coffee mugs, and we had reusable water bottles. We had reusable silverware, just a long list of things we had to think about. Well, when are we going to give these to people, and how are we going to use them? How are we going to explain this, et cetera, et cetera. We had additional staff on the trip to help manage things, just in case we thought we might get overwhelmed, or in case we needed people to go to the hotel ahead of time to take the little shampoo bottles out of the rooms. We had to target pinch points in real time. We had to do additional training and then additional scouting on location. So passing back over to Erin and talk about some of the know before you go, maybe in your own adventures, thinking like how we did, tackling every little bit of potential pitfall, and what are the solutions there?
Yeah, so this is what we started to think about really as we were planning for this, is really understanding what we were going to have access to. And I think Court's teased some of that out a bit, but this is for whether you're traveling or whether you're in your own home, like knowing what type of waste management you have is really an important piece, because it's not always intuitive what you're supposed to do with something, and knowing what you actually have access to lets you know the answer, right? So do you have recycling, and what do they take, right? Some recycling facilities, especially in the US, I know most of you probably have, you have to read the sheet that your recycler sends to know which thing they're taking at that time. So know what's accepted and know where, right? Everything else is landfill. That's trash if it's not accepted, right? And then for compost, what's accepted and where. This is really important when I'm talking about biodegradability. The expectation is not going to be that you can litter those things. It's that you need to find a place to manage them in order for them to actually get composted. If you're going to bring reusables, again, thinking about cleaning, in the US, we can go into our hotel room and we can wash it with some soap and water. But in other areas of the world, it's not that simple. So how are you going to manage that, and thinking about that? And then finally, prepping your to-go kits, right? So making sure you have your kit of reusables with you. And on this trip specifically, Nat Hab really outfitted all the guests with the stuff they might need, making sure that they had their water bottle, their coffee mug, and their utensils, their straw, their napkins, their plate, their bowl. We had everything we really needed to make sure that they had the tools to be really successful in this chapter. So go ahead to the next slide. And so how do you think about that when you're packing your cooler and van? For those of you who've been on a Nat Hab adventure, they got lots of snacks, which I think is really important because we like to eat a lot while we're adventuring. But so how do you do that in a way that is both, using less waste, but also is safe, right? So how are you going to create a bulk option? How are you going to dispense that without a whole bunch of people sticking their hands in? Let's not have that petri dish that is the peanuts on the bar scenario. We want something that's safe and healthy. So having access to a napkin or a bandana for them to pour it into. How are we going to refill all of those containers we have them bringing, right? So for water, having larger coolers. If that's not possible, or there's not potable water where you're traveling, bringing larger plastic jugs and then making sure you carry those and find a place to recycle them when you're done. And then for coffee and tea, really thinking about how they're going to, the carafe that carries it, and not only that, but the additional things like cream and sugar. I remember in one of the restaurants we went into, they had only single-use creamers, and the first morning that we were there, Court worked with the folks behind the counter to get us a container that we could pour it out of, and then brought them a container to use moving forward for them to refill. I think it was like a swell jug that they could use to fill with creamer to put out there, so that they would have a reusable option. So think about those little details. And then for like tea bags and paper pouches, you want to use compostable or recyclable ones, and this can be kind of difficult. I remember we spent a lot of time determining with our tea bags whether or not they were recyclable or whether or not they actually had plastic in them. And so these are really important as you're thinking about what you're going to do with them and what brand you bring along. Go ahead to the next slide.
So the next one's mine. I want to hit on an important point here because you bring this up. So there are two parts. Like when we say, check to see if the tea bags are compostable, or check to see if the hotel that you're booking has recycling and composting. Asking those questions, that's really two part. One part is for your own knowledge, of course. That's kind of what is overtly being told here. So but I would argue maybe the equally, if not better benefit is the fact that you are asking the question to the proprietors, to the owners of the hotel or the front desk managers. What you're showing is that if you ask these questions, they're going to start taking tabs and tallies and understand this idea that people are actually wanting to know if there's recyclable facilities there. They're wanting, tea companies will actually take notes of if people want recyclable, compostable tea bags. So I think what you do is by asking these questions, you create a market trend. And so the more people that ask, even if they say no, that's not a failed attempt. There's still a victory there because you're showing them that there's demand. So I would say if there's anything that you take away from this, I'm hoping there's more than this, but of course one big thing is when you ask those questions, even if you don't have the ability to recycle yourself at the hotels and whatnot, just asking the question is huge because it shows the interest from the general public in these sustainability things. So talking about vans, I'll go back for a second. I really wanted, I lobbied hard to try to outfit our trip with VW buses like this. I thought it'd just be like a cool retro. No, kidding. No, we had beautiful state-of-the-art Sprinter vans, Mercedes Sprinter vans. These things are awesome. And this is what we had to work with, so this is just a little back area where we'd store all the luggage. If we had to think about bringing extra coolers to chill the creamer between breakfasts and whatnot, it quickly got filled up. We had to have a box for recycling. We had to have a box for composting. We had a box for TerraCycling, which is a new technology to help recycle hard to recycle materials like crinkly little plastic wraps and whatnot. And then of course, anything else that we wanted as far as special, hiking poles and spotting scopes. So we quickly realized that it's very important to be extremely efficient with space as we think, we can have this long laundry list of all the things we want a full composting thing and a full recycling thing in every van and every person, but we have to be efficient, of course. And that's one of the big things we learned. So then we kicked the trip off. This is go time. This is ground zero. This is when we're all starting to think and convey everything we want for sustainability. So the first thing we do is we outfit all of our guests with their recyclables over the course of the trip. This included a couple bandanas for napkins, a tote bag so that they go in any sort of gift shops, they don't have to use one of the plastic bags. We supplied bamboo silverware, a coffee mug, a water bottle, a stasher bag or two, and I think a few other things. But this is really kicking the trip off. And I think one of the cool things is we have this welcome dinner at Natural Habitat where we do have this initial time to set expectations, to talk about the trip, and I thought it was a really, really nice kickoff to the trip. And one of the things we recommended, and I think we'll get to this in a few slides, but with food waste, one of the biggest things is just don't get it on your plate in the first place if you don't think that you're going to eat it. And we had to have kind of clever ways of clean plate club and talking about maybe splitting meals and sharing plates and sharing desserts. Like, oh, who likes a cheesecake over here? And I thought from the moment this trip started, we had these highly eco-conscious travelers. We gave them a few materials, a few little extra tips and tricks, and people were buying into it. The very, very first meal, people were saying, oh, who likes vegetarian pasta? And, complete strangers that have never met each other. So right at that welcome dinner, things went off really, really well. And I think it set a great tone to the trip. But before we continue on to kind of the general trip itself, let me hand it back over to Erin for a few words here.
Yeah, I think this kind of summarized some of the stuff we've been talking about, right? When you're out and about, and I think you could say this just around town when you're not traveling, right? Is be a good steward of bringing your reusables with you, right? Like I always try to have a reusable in my, a reusable coffee mug and water bottle in my computer bag as I travel so that I always have them on hand. And so the same thing when you're traveling, right? Have the reusable stuff that you're going to be traveling with for the bathroom and the hotel and for the stuff you're going to carry around. If you are a tour guide or trying to engage with hotels, talk about that bulk dispensing, sorry. Same thing that Court said, they may say no, but the more we ask and the more customers bring it up, the more they're going to think about it in the long term. And then as you explore the world, right? Think about the less trash you bring in, the less you have to manage, right? You don't want to leave anything. You want to leave no trace as you're traveling. So the less you carry, the better. And then if you do have to use single use, bring it on out and find a way to recycle it later if possible.
Excellent. So after we provide all this information, all these tools, all these tips and tricks to the guest, the trip begins. And this is where, you know, a really special part of it is you think, okay, we turned this trip on its head, we changed things, we reconfigured things, and it's going to be a wildly different experience from a normal Nat Hab trip. No, not at all. The great thing is, you know, having guided many Nat Hab trips over the years and all over around the world, this was in every way a classic, awesome natural habitat adventures trip. Yes, it had the extra kind of value add, the extra benefit of being zero waste and so on and so forth. But, you know, I think what that actually did is it added another level of camaraderie to the trip. We had this single goal in mind. Of course, you know, one of our collective goals is to spot wildlife, and that we did. We were, you know, throughout Yellowstone National Park and the Tetons and seeing beautiful stuff from wolves and wildlife to extraordinary scenery and wildlife again. But, you know, having this unified goal brought us together quicker, like I said, with a welcome dinner, and in a more cohesive way than I've actually previously seen on Nat Hab trips. And I think that was another big takeaway is if you set out that goal at the beginning, even as early on as in like the advertising of the trip, but especially on the trip itself, you get you know, very immediate buy-in. And if people start off with an inclination to be sustainable and conservation minded, it just makes it that much better. So yeah, it was an amazing adventure, irrespective of the zero waste part. But of course, you know, throughout the trip, we encountered things that we didn't, you know, we knew every day was gonna be completely new. We didn't know what next meal would bring as far as surprises. And of course we had those. Fortunately, we were able to deal with all of them. But, you know, one of the biggest things that concerned me going into the trip is dealing with food waste. And that's why I mentioned, you know, a little bit ago that right at the beginning, we said, okay, guys, so if you want dessert, you got to eat your meal. You know, just kind of kidding around a little bit, like Clean Plate Club, if you remember that from as a kid. But the splitting of meals, the asking for half portions, is because we knew that this could be the X factor. Not only is it kind of weird to be telling people what to eat and how to eat, but also the idea that we're going to be carrying around our food until the next compost drop is weird. Like, is it going to be stinky? How is this actually going to work? You know, one of the examples I remember, we were able to contact the restaurant and say, hey, you know, for all of your condiments, we don't want single use. You know, feel free to bring what you're bringing from the kitchen, but they shouldn't be in, like, you know, single packets. Like, do it from bulk containers. And you know, they brought this one example. I think like 2 people ordered a baked potato, but every single person had a full baked potato station like next to them. So we're like, oh, this hurts, but this is going in the compost bin, you know. So throughout, we brought affectionately named Kermit, Kermit the bin, I don't know, Kermit the barrel, with us. And this is a 5-gallon bucket. I gotta say, we bought it, I think on Amazon or similar, with this fancy eco label, and it was touted to be, you know, something a little bit more next level for storing compost. But I gotta say, you can go to any home improvement store and get a 5-gallon bucket, and it was as good. And the pleasant surprise here is that it didn't smell at all throughout the course of the trip, and we didn't have our compost drop until like day 6 of the 7-day adventure. So I can say, luckily, even in Yellowstone in the summer, I think someone ordered fish for the very first meal, and of course I'm just like sitting there saying, oh no, but it all worked. It totally worked. Like the little compost ecosystem had, you know, its own process, and it actually did not smell. We had it in the vans. It was absolutely amazing. So even though it was kind of an awkward situation, you know, it worked quite well. And you can see, you know, here's Erin diligently scraping her plate, and Tim looks just ultra pleased to be doing this as well. But nevertheless, although it was probably one of the weirder things and more atypical things we did, it was fine. That's kind of what I had to say about it. It ended up being fine. You know, we had a lot of different meals that were picnic meals. We had to think about the materials being used here. Even things like little wrappers for chocolates. What did we store the candied ginger in? What did we store the dried fruit in? Again, s'mores at night. These were all the considerations, but I can happily say we were victorious. And here's a great group photo to kind of show the celebration with our various composting and recycling, our Deuter dirt bags. You can see here, these are the yellow and green bags. In a cool way, we might have actually been negative waste on this trip. One of our World Wildlife Fund folks that joined, Mauricio, actually was on the road very early on, instigating people to help pick up trash that we found along the way. And you would think that Yellowstone National Park or any national park is very void of litter. And unfortunately, you know, when you have 5 million visitors a year, it's a law of numbers. You know, you see the random Coke can, you see the napkin that blew off the trail or something. And so at every stop at maybe a scenic viewpoint or at a group photo opportunity like this, you'd see everybody quickly, you know, grab their little bags and start putting in any trash. And again, the bonding that we had over that single goal was amazing. And I like to think that maybe we were negative waste on this trip when it was all said and done. Very, very cool.
You're probably right. I feel like throughout the week, we, as people embraced the journey we were on, I feel like they became ambassadors for our mission almost, right? You know, coming in, trying to figure it out, and then wanting to do more, and then, you know, leaving the trip excited about doing what they could when they got back home. So I think you had added benefit. I think you're right. I think we did a great job.
And that speaks to a lot of our mission here is that, yeah, we could be one trip, you know, 12 travelers, and we did it. You know, that's great. But what we're really trying to do is create a generation of ambassadors. And that ambassador is not just the people on the trip, but the people that hear about the trip. So you are our next level of ambassadors that say, wow, you know, these guys did this and it worked. Here's the things that were challenges. Here are the things that were opportunities. Coming up, we'll talk about those. But they did it. So we're trying to, you know, be that megaphone for conservation and share the news with the world. So okay, getting into, I find this to be one of the more fascinating parts of the talk. You know, this is where we get into some of the results and the metrics. So the remainder of this presentation will be on this, and we'll get into Q&A here in just a little bit. So of course, you know, spoiler alert, we were successful. Here's the group. Here's the one mason jar holding it up like the monkeys of 2001: Space Odyssey. Oh, you know, it's amazing. We did it. We actually did it. And I can tell you, it wasn't even that full. We didn't have to, you know, step on it and scrunch it down. We were able to put it all in one mason jar. So what we did, 12 travelers, 6 full days. We had 2 half days. So when you hear me say like between 6 and 7 days, 6 full days, 4 hotels, 9 restaurants, 4 cities, 1 mason jar of trash. And everything else went to recycling, composting, TerraCycling, or we refused it, which is a really cool part as well. So here you see me weighing the buckets of compost diligently. And so here are some of our numbers. And I think I'm just going to go here. So, okay, let's start off with the upper left-hand corner. I'm just looking over at my slide here. So compost, 27.8 pounds, recycling 20.4, TerraCycle, which again is like the small bits of plastic and hard to recycle materials, 50.9 pounds diverted. That is really cool stuff. Now, that in itself is interesting, but here's, I think, more interesting part is if you think about 12 travelers for 6 days, there's a national average out there that the average American uses produces 4.4 pounds of trash a day. That is a staggering number. I don't necessarily think that our average traveler uses that average amount, but nevertheless, it's the main baseline number out there. So when you think about it, we could have produced 316.8 pounds of trash throughout the course of the trip. But when you take away that left-hand figure, we actually avoided, through all of our refusing and reusing and calling hotels and calling restaurants and saying, you know, hey, we don't want you to do this. We want to avoid this kind of stuff. We actually avoided over 260 pounds of trash from ever being produced in the first place. And I think that's actually one of the most important stats of the trip. It's absolutely amazing. One thing I hadn't mentioned yet, but we also did an office match where for the week of the trip, our office actually went zero waste in a show of solidarity to see, okay, well, we're going to be with the whole gang. We're going to be with the travelers. We're going to do it ourselves. All 90 some odd people of us. But also it gave us some interesting metrics to kind of compare and contrast. So I think one of the again, more interesting things, but also more alarming things is on trip, what a percentage that compost actually was and how that compares to non-travel life. And so I'll talk about this here in just a few seconds, but keep that in mind that, if you look on the left-hand side there, recycling topped out as number one in the office, composting second, whereas composting, food waste from a group of highly eco-conscious travelers still ended up being the biggest slice of the pie, literally and metaphorically. So we'll get to that in a second. So into our key takeaways. Oh, and here we are already. That was fast. So with the food waste thing, so here's the idea, is that if food waste is as big a deal as we think, travel, that might be the thing to look at next. That might be one of the biggest tackling points that we need to make as an industry. If you think about it, we are essentially eating in restaurants 3 meals a day. People don't necessarily know the portion size. They don't know the quality. They don't even really know if, that lasagna that they order is going to be like the lasagna that they like. Maybe it's a totally different thing. So even with a group of highly eco-conscious travelers, food waste is a big deal. So that's one of the biggest things we're tackling here at Natural Habitat. Unfortunately, we have folks over at World Wildlife Fund helping advise on where we can pull back on certain things, and food sustainability is the next big horizon for us. Lessening food waste can actually be fun. This is another big takeaway. So like I said, at the welcome dinner, I delicately and gently said, hey, listen, one way to prevent this going forward and to minimize is to share plates, make a friend, literally and metaphorically break bread with a neighbor, learn something about someone, figure out who likes the same things you like. If you're not feeling particularly hungry, maybe ask for a half portion. And I'll never forget, such an inspirational part of the trip is one person on the trip who was, kind of quiet, but towards the end of the trip, we were at a restaurant and she was ordering a pasta dish from one of the local restaurants, and she said, I'd like the pasta, but I know you guys don't do half portions, but I would personally like that. I know you may not know if you can do it, but go check with the chef. They'll probably be okay with it. Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. And boom, it's like, wow, if you can do it, like anybody can do this. You can ask for the things that you want. And lessening food waste can be a good thing and a fun thing. Sharing meals, asking for half portions, being part of the Clean Plate Club. It wasn't as onerous and as challenging as I thought. Zero waste is inspiring. One of the things I was also concerned about is, we're going into some rural communities. We're going to people's livelihoods and restaurants that are, with seasonal employees from all over the world. I thought we were going to be really annoying. I thought people were going to say, oh gosh, here's the people that are coming saying, don't use the paper napkin rings again, like that level. But we got there and immediately, upon triple confirming everything, like you're not using the paper napkins, right? We got high fives. We got people, young people from all over the world here in Yellowstone National Park for this season saying, gosh, we are so inspired by what you're doing. We want to tell the ownership, we want to tell the management that this is the way we should be doing it going forward. And, people all around appreciating the extra effort that we're doing. And believe it or not, the extra effort we're asking them to do, they were happy about it. They were inspired. In addition, this was not the main intention of the trip, but the list of media mentions, I think, is again that megaphone. If we do one trip, that's great. 12 people, it makes a splash. But the biggest splash is by doing presentations like this. The biggest splash is by getting over, this is not the full list, like 60 different media attentions from Forbes to MSN to Lonely Planet to Condé Nast, mentioning even Sunset Magazine, had something about the world's first zero waste adventure, getting people to bring this in their dialogue and their day-to-day communications and understanding of what it means to be sustainable. Really, really awesome stuff. So yeah, the inspiration was just fantastic.
Well, I'm gonna give us a couple of things that you guys can do in your daily lives, and I'm gonna try to move through these quickly because I know we don't have a lot of time left for questions. So we'll have more of this available later for you guys to learn more on. But number one, reduce. Like, just start by using a little bit less, thinking about what you're buying, what you're purchasing, what you're eating, right, what you're ordering, because the less we use, the less we have to manage when we're done. Try to avoid excessive packaging and single use. I do want to highlight that packaging and and materials can be important. They protect, they help extend shelf life and create food safety, but we just want to be really conscious of those things and ask the question. Eat and drink for here, not a huge problem today with COVID when most of us are at home, but really thinking about how you can limit your takeaway if you don't have reusable containers, and then leave no trace. Don't leave waste in the environment. It's not where it belongs. Go ahead to the next one. Reuse. Keep bringing your own. Bring those things that you can reuse and replace the single-use items. Pick things that last. Pick things that you can use over and over again, hundreds of times, and that means quality. And if it's not working for you, swap it out. Get it to somebody else who can reuse it. Go ahead to the next slide. Recycle. You gotta know what you can recycle. So ask the questions, reach out to your waste management, go to their website, find out those things that are okay in the bin, because if they're not, they contaminate the bin. So if you're not sure, the best bet is to throw it away, because you don't want to waste everything else in that bin because you contaminated it with something else that couldn't be recycled. So go ahead to the next slide. And then finally, be an advocate. Like the guys, like the guests that were on this trip, right? They came home and they wanted to change their communities in the same way that we sort of helped them to learn how to do this on the trip. So learn about things, how they work, and then when you see a problem, try to be a part of fixing it, right? Whether it's you want compost and you don't have it, or your local coffee shop is using something that is not recyclable and you want them to, speak about that. And the more you advocate, the more you can change, right? Even if it's just going to your local store, or if you're writing letters to your local councilman.
Fantastic. Well, one thing I want to point out on that last slide, 2 slides ago, is that if you have a local recycling facility and they have a phone number and you can call them, ask if they'll do a tour for you. We've done that through our offices here in Boulder County, and it's absolutely amazing to get a tour of your local facility. It's actually far more inspiring than you'd think. So that's another way you can get involved and understand the recycling, the do's and don'ts a little bit better. So at the end of the day, zero waste is possible with the right tools, the right people, the right plans, the right prep. We realize it is possible. That's the biggest takeaway. But like I said, we don't need 12 people doing zero waste perfectly once a trip or once a year or once a whatever. We need all of you guys doing it imperfectly. We need, one small little step, each year, each day, or each whatever. Just the little tiny things add up to big changes. And I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing we can do is create a conservation culture. So even though this might seem, like small steps, they really add up to a lot, and they turn heads. They make people realize that, oh, if he's doing it, maybe I should be doing it. If she's doing it, I should do this. So just stick with it, create that conservation culture. And even though this is the end of the presentation, we're just beginning with all this. So good stuff. And thank you. And I think we'll take some questions.
All right, terrific. Well, there's a lot of enthusiasm that I've been watching, and I love all of the questions. And so I'm going to start with this one. Everyone's fascinated with the mason jar. We want to know what ended up in the mason jar.
Great question. Great question. So basically, ironically, airline baggage tags, they're so durable and so sticky that we felt like even TerraCycle, which can recycle hard to recycle things, we just felt like it would gunk up the machines. There's very, very little chance. The other big dominant thing was actually some cleaning supplies. So, being on a sightseeing trip throughout Yellowstone, we wanted to make sure the windows were clean, the vehicles were clean. So like little Swiffer wipes and the high fiber things that had some chemicals on it and also could clearly have, some plastic. It just was the wrong combination. So I think those were 2 of the main things. But as you can probably imagine, these are things that could be fixable in the future. Erin, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say cleaning wipes are a surprising one. Everybody thinks they're fully pulp and paper, but they're not. The reason they're so durable and like stretchy, it's because they've got a bit of plastic in them. The other one was floss. And I remember this mostly because I think you and I at the end of the trip went through everything to make sure it was going in the right container. And I remember handling a lot of people's floss and being less than pleased about that. But that was something that was in there with that. So the problem with, TerraCycle takes some things that are laminates. And by laminates, it's 2 different materials, plastic foil, plastic paper. But with those sticky labels, and there are some things that the laminates that are not recyclable, and so those tags were one of them. But it wasn't bad. It was we got a lot more back than we put into the landfill. That's for sure.
People were very diligent not to create it in the first place. Yep. That's the awesome thing.
Yeah, that is. Well, what was your feedback from the hotels and restaurants? Were they exciting and willing to get on board with the program?
Yes, they were. That was again one of the most inspirational things is that we thought we were going to be really annoying, and maybe we were a little bit, but most across the board they're like, oh, this is we hadn't thought about this. Oh, you can do this, because we essentially, one of the things we do around the world at Nat Hab is we go into these places that are often remote and they often don't have normal inner city facilities to do really anything you like modern conveniences, and we help give them the sustainability tools. We might buy things that invest in their hotel or their lodge, like a water cooler, this or that. And so, a lot of the stuff that we bought for this trip, we kept for all of the remaining Yellowstone programs for the remainder of the summer, which is like another dozen trips. And those things that could be left at certain restaurants or hotels to help with their coffee creamers, to help with plates, we did so. And so, it's not a lot of money for us. We're talking about something in like the hundreds of dollars. The biggest challenge is injecting those ideologies and injecting the tools into their day-to-day workflow. So we took the cost, or the barrier to entry of cost out of the equation by supplying the things, and we also showed them how it would work. We showed them how we talked to our travelers about it, and they were extremely receptive.
Good. Well, we have a lot of questions also about the stasher bag. So first off, what is a stasher bag and where do you find one?
Amazon. There's many. Yeah. I feel like I have one downstairs, but it's too far away for me to go grab. But they're like a reusable Ziploc, but much more durable. They come in a lot of different sizes, and they have an option with a wider base or a narrow base. But what was great is Nat Hab had them for all of us to use. So if we wanted to grab a snack in them, it was a great container for us to use some of those refillable snacks that were the bulk snacks in the vans. But also, when we did those takeout lunches, Tim would go ahead and drop them off ahead of time so that the folks making our sandwiches could put them in the stasher bags and we could use them. So I've been using them a long time after the trip because of it, and I would say they are a really good reusable if you're looking to replace your Ziplocs.
Yeah, they're amazing. They're food grade. They're silicone based. You can even like boil them should you need to. Like you don't need to, but like they also label them for like sous vide cooking and whatnot. But yeah, they're pretty affordable. They're like $10 or $15 per one, sometimes like even less. And you find that even in your own home, like I cook at home a lot, do a lot of leftovers. I have like 4 of them, and that's everything I need.
All you need. You
They're
don't need.
absolutely amazing. Amazon, I know Whole Foods sources them a lot. Any sort of natural grocery store, there are a lot of brands. I find the Stashers to be really good, mainly because of how the top closes. It's
They
just a
feel the
very
best.
familiar Ziploc. There's
Yeah.
some where like a bar slides across. It's a little bit harder to manage, but Stasher itself, I've been nothing but impressed.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about how you've been using them afterwards, which leads me into the next question, which is, will aspects of this zero waste trip be instituted into some of the Nat Hab trips, non-zero waste trips?
That was one of the biggest plans. I knew that we were going to take away about 12 lessons learned, something like that. And I knew that pretty quickly when we did this experiment, we were going to be able to adapt and adopt about 8 of them to 50% of our trips immediately. And then maybe another couple more that are a little bit more rigorous into another 10%. And eventually we can get closer and closer, further and further. The plan is not necessarily to make every single trip zero waste, because again, that, don't let that perfection be the enemy. But yeah, we from basically day one, I was even calling the office and giving status reports. We've been integrating stuff ever since that trip, and it's been pretty amazing. But again, our biggest thing, because we've been very environmentally sensitive and responsible for a long time, it's been very core to our mind. So a lot of the stuff we were doing already, but now that we have this concise, complete packet, more or less, we can ping this out to the industry at large and give them the tools and information in a very complete, cohesive, fully covered way.
Hmm. Okay, so I'll ask you 2 more questions and then we will wrap it up. Going to combine a few here. We had people asking about how Nat Hab, or does Nat Hab have a carbon offset program, or do you integrate reducing carbon into your guest travel experiences?
We are 100% carbon neutral. Yep, and we've been so since 2007. That's broken down in two different ways. So since 2007 to the beginning of 2019, we offset all carbon emissions over the course of trips. So that means anything that you do on the trip, vehicles, the food you eat, the lodging you stay in, internal flights that are part of the trip, boat rides, you name it, every single thing was covered. And then we had a program in place where people could opt in to offset their flights. As of 2 years ago, we have started now offsetting all flights and everything across the board. So you are fully carbon neutral. You don't have to pay anything extra. Nothing's optional. We do it for you. Yep.
Hmm. Okay. And do you have plans to run such a trip again?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that was one of the big things. We said, well, if we're going to do this once, should we think about doing it again? And at first we thought, well, maybe we should. Maybe we should then do Alaska and then try to look at Botswana and then maybe try to do another trip in the US. And what it ended up being is that we found that it's very time intensive, very resource intensive to do things to perfection, right? We needed to make a statement. We needed to do the experiment. We needed to have that foray into this. We found that with those resources of time and everything else, why we don't need 12 people doing it perfectly again next year, and then again next year. We need like thousands of our travelers getting 50% of these benefits or 60% of these benefits. So what in the end, we're going to be, more minimal waste in aggregate in total. But the idea of doing another zero waste trip, I feel like we would be taking away from the greater good by directing it and funneling it into just one experience with a smaller number of people. Because again, a big part of this is creating influencers. Our travelers are the influencers of our world. You are all the people going out there and preaching the story of sustainability and conservation. So we want to, talk more and integrate more of this with more of our travelers in a much, much bigger way. So we've elected, at least for the short term, to expand this kind of laterally across all of our trips, all 8,000 travelers if we can, rather than just ping it down to another 6, 10 or travelers on one trip.
Hmm. All right, that's cool. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you both so much. I'm going to turn it back to you for closing comments.
Okay. Erin?
Well, thank you guys so much for listening to us tell the story of this journey. And it truly was a journey where we worked with a number of guests to bring this idea to fruition. And what I'm really excited about as a material scientist and a conservationist is that there's so much potential for us to learn from this and just do better moving forward. So I think what Court said was right. Don't take all of this in and think I got to do it all. Pick those things that are doable, do them, and you'll find that you'll be excited to do more. So so happy that we were able to share this with you, and look forward to having further conversations as you guys have questions.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. Thanks so much for being part of this, and thanks very much for being part of the trip itself. You are absolutely an integral team player in all this. So, I mean, that's my point is that sustainability is kind of like a language. Conservation is like a language. You have to learn by bits and pieces to become fluent in it. So learn small phrases at a time. Don't just take everything we said necessarily and say, oh, we can either do it all or nothing. It doesn't matter if we don't do little parts. You learn it in phrases, you learn individual words. And so once that becomes completely rote memorization, once you become fluent in part of it, you can move on to the next part. And that's kind of my whole point is just do what you can, take the low hanging fruit, do the easy stuff if that's what you can do for now. And gradually you're gonna get so good at that, you're gonna wanna expand your horizons and do some of the more challenging things. And we will all create a conservation culture across this world together.
All right, my thanks as well. We will get the replay out to everybody and be on the lookout for an email over the weekend where we announce the topics for next week. So with that, we will wish you all a happy Friday, a great weekend, and thank you for being here. Goodbye, everybody.
Cool.